She looked like just another warehouse worker. Worn boots, a dusty jacket, and silence. Lieutenant Stevens saw disrespect, insisted she remove the unauthorized military uniform. But when she rolled up her sleeve, the room froze. Delta 17's mark burned into her skin. The unit that didn't officially exist. Until now. They thought she was nobody. What they didn't know? She was the last survivor of a mission buried by classified ink. Stick around, because when the truth surfaces, rank means nothing. And justice doesn't salute ignorance. Be sure to let us know where you're watching from and what time you stumbled upon this video. Subscribe to join us on this journey. Lieutenant Mark Stevens' polished badges caught the harsh warehouse lighting as he stalked across the concrete floor, blood rushing in his ears. That unauthorized Delta 17 jacket was an insult to everything he stood for. 15 years of maintaining strict military standards, of ensuring proper respect for the uniform. His jaw clenched at the civilians' audacity. "The arrogance of these people," Lieutenant Mark Stevens muttered, adjusting his collar. Every eye in the warehouse turned to follow his purposeful stride. Good. This would be a lesson for everyone about proper military protocol. The woman, Tessa Morn, according to her cheap plastic badge, continued stacking boxes as if she hadn't noticed his approach. Lieutenant Mark Stevens's temples throbbed. How dare she ignore his presence? His hand instinctively touched the lieutenant's bars on his collar, drawing strength from their familiar ridges. "Ma'am, that jacket isn't costume jewelry." His voice boomed across the warehouse floor, echoing off metal shelving. Several workers fumbled their packages, startled by his tone. Lieutenant Mark Stevens allowed himself a small smile. Fear was respect's close cousin. "This is a restricted military insignia," Lieutenant Mark Stevens continued, reaching to grip the jacket's sleeve. "I'll need you to remove it immediately and—" The woman's movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as she slowly rolled up her sleeve. Lieutenant Mark Stevens' words died in his throat. That tattoo, scorched and warped but unmistakable. Delta 17's mark, seared into flesh that had clearly seen fire. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. Social media exploding as bystanders' videos hit the internet. Delta reveal trending within minutes. Have you ever felt absolute certainty crumble? Lieutenant Mark Stevens would later write in his report. "I stood there, badges suddenly heavy on my chest, watching 15 years of authority dissolve in seconds." The lieutenant's bars felt cold against his fingertips now. Every camera phone pointed at him captured the moment his face drained of color. The great Lieutenant Mark Stevens, enforcer of military protocol, confronting Delta 17's sole survivor over a jacket she had every right to wear. Type authority if you've ever watched someone's power collapse in real time. His hand fell from his collar, badges no longer offering comfort. Lieutenant Mark Stevens tried to speak, but for the first time in his career, he had no words, only questions. How had she survived? What did this mean for everything he thought he knew about Delta 17? The warehouse's fluorescent lights suddenly seemed harsh, exposing. Lieutenant Mark Stevens felt sweat beading on his forehead as Tessa Morn finally met his gaze. In her eyes, he saw not defiance or anger, but something far worse: pity. Will Lieutenant Mark Stevens' authority survive this revelation? The answer would shake not just his career, but the very foundations of military protocol he'd dedicated his life to enforcing. Lieutenant Mark Stevens stares at his reflection in the polished brass nameplate on his desk, the weight of 2 decades of military service pressing down on his shoulders. The classified files scattered before him tell a story he never wanted to read. One that transforms his morning's self-righteous confrontation into a catastrophic error in judgment. "Delta 17, he whispers, fingers trembling as they trace the faded ink on the weathered document. His mind keeps returning to that moment in the warehouse, his voice booming with authority as he berated Tessa Morn about proper military protocol. The irony tastes bitter now. The security footage plays on his computer screen for the 20th time. Lieutenant Mark Stevens watches himself, proud and imposing in his pristine uniform, storming toward the quiet logistics worker. His past self's voice crackles through the speakers. "That jacket is unauthorized military property. Remove it immediately." The viral video had already amassed millions of views. Stevens. Fail trends on multiple platforms each share another nail in his carefully constructed reputation. Lieutenant Mark Stevens minimizes the window, unable to watch himself make the same mistake again. 7 years of signing authorizations, of wielding power like a shield, of dismissing lower-ranking concerns. It all takes on a different meaning now. The personnel file reveals the truth about Delta 17. Only 2 members were ever authorized to wear that distinctive unit tattoo. One died in action. The other, "Sir?" His assistant's voice through the intercom makes Lieutenant Mark Stevens jump. "General Morrison is requesting an immediate video conference." His fingers brush against his medals, each one feeling heavier than the last. These symbols of authority, once his pride, now mock him. The classified documents detail Delta 17's unprecedented success rate, their classified missions, their sacrifices. And there, in stark black and white, is Tessa Morn's service record. Lieutenant Mark Stevens recalls his mentor's words from years ago. "Power isn't about who you can control, Mark. It's about understanding who you serve." He had nodded then, but never truly listened. Now those words echo like an accusation. The security footage has spawned dozens of reaction videos, each one analyzing his body language, his tone, his assumption of authority. Military forums buzz with discussions about Delta 17, though few know the true significance. His phone lights up with another notification. CNN wants a statement. Type, "Truth hurts," if you've ever discovered you were the villain in someone else's story. More classified files reveal the systematic burial of Delta 17's achievements, the bureaucratic maze that transformed heroes into statistics. Lieutenant Mark Stevens recognizes his own signature on some of these documents, approvals given without proper review, authority exercised without understanding. The brass nameplate catches the afternoon light, and Lieutenant Mark Stevens sees something new in its reflection. Fear. Not of punishment or demotion, but of the realization that his entire career rests on a foundation of assumed superiority and unearned authority. A message from the PR department flashes on his screen. Viral video reached 5 million views. Recommend immediate response. Lieutenant Mark Stevens closes the message without replying. What could he possibly say? That he, the decorated Lieutenant Mark Stevens, had publicly humiliated one of the military's most decorated covert operators because he couldn't see past his own prejudices? The classified files paint a picture of sacrifice, valor, and silence, qualities he had claimed to embody but never truly understood. Each page reveals another layer of his ignorance, another moment when his bureaucratic arrogance had contributed to the erasure of true heroes. His medals feel like anchors now, dragging him down into the depths of his own misconceptions. Lieutenant Mark Stevens reaches for the last file, the one detailing the final mission of Delta 17. His hands shake so badly he can barely open it. The truth lies there in military precision, coordinates, casualties, and a single survivor who chose anonymity over accolades. A survivor who now moves boxes in his warehouse, wearing a jacket that tells a story he was too blind to read. Lieutenant Mark Stevens stands frozen at his office window, watching Tessa Morn's silhouette move through the logistics bay below. Her movements are precise, mechanical, yet beneath them lies a weight he never noticed before. The survivor of Delta 17. The thought hammers in his skull with each step she takes. His phone buzzes again, the screen lighting up with another media request. CNN, this time. Lieutenant Mark Stevens' hands tremble as he silences it, adding it to the growing list of ignored calls. The newsroom wants his statement about publicly confronting a decorated war hero, about making her relive that horror in front of everyone. His stomach churns at the memory. The insignia pin on his chest catches the afternoon light. Lieutenant Mark Stevens reaches up to touch it, the metal cold against his fingertips. This morning, he'd polished it with pride. Now each gleaming edge feels like an accusation. 7 years. She'd carried that burden alone for 7 years, while he'd strutted through these halls demanding respect he hadn't earned. "Sir?" His assistant's voice crackles through the intercom. "Channel 5 is on line 3. They're running a special tonight about Delta 17's final mission." Lieutenant Mark Stevens watches his own reflection flinch in the window. "Tell them no comment," he manages, his voice hoarse. Below, Tessa continues her work, seemingly oblivious to the storm she's inadvertently unleashed. Hat Delta Hero is trending nationwide, with millions sharing archived footage of that fatal mission. The whispers follow him now. In the mess hall, conversations die as he passes. In briefings, eyes that once snapped to attention now drift away, heavy with judgment. The corridors that once echoed with deferential Lieutenant Stevens now carry different sounds. Hushed conversations about sacrifice, about survival, about shame. His phone buzzes again. This time, it's internal. A notification about tomorrow's command meeting. Lieutenant Mark Stevens' throat tightens as he reads the agenda. Review of recent personnel incident, protocol violations, and conduct unbecoming. The insignia pin seems to burn against his chest now. Lieutenant Mark Stevens unpins it with trembling fingers, holding it up to the light. 7 years ago, while he was accepting this promotion, Tessa Morn was pulling herself from the wreckage of Delta 17, the sole survivor carrying the weight of 15 lost souls. "Have you ever watched your world crumble in slow motion?" he whispers to his reflection, the pin glinting accusingly in his palm. "Have you felt your certainties dissolve like morning mist?" The trending hashtag updates. Delta Hero has reached 10 million mentions. Each one feels like another nail in the coffin of his authority, his reputation, his understanding of himself. The weight of consequence settles over Lieutenant Mark Stevens like a shroud, and for the first time in his career, he realizes that some falls can't be stopped with rank alone. Type respect if you've ever misjudged someone's strength. Share this story to honor those who carry invisible burdens. As Lieutenant Mark Stevens stands rigid before the media circus, His starched collar feels like a noose tightening with each camera flash. His fingertips brush against the insignia that once gave him unquestioned authority, now burning like a brand of shame against his chest. The reporter's questions blur into white noise, but one keeps cutting through. "Lieutenant Stevens, did you know Tessa Morn was Delta 17's combat medic when you confronted her?" His rehearsed response tastes like ash. "No comments about Delta 17 or its members." The words that once flowed with such righteous certainty now catch in his throat. Behind him, the rhythmic sound of Tessa's forklift loading supplies serves as a steady counterpoint to his racing heart. She hasn't stopped working, hasn't even acknowledged the spectacle he's created. Her quiet dignity makes his previous actions feel even more grotesque. A young reporter pushes forward, thrusting her microphone like a weapon. "Lieutenant Stevens, sources say you tried to strip her of a jacket earned with blood. How does it feel to know you attempted to humiliate a decorated war hero?" The question hits like shrapnel. His mind flashes to yesterday's confrontation, his voice booming across the warehouse. "Remove that unauthorized uniform item immediately!" The memory of his own arrogance makes him nauseous now. He'd been so certain, so righteous in his authority. The viral video of that moment has already reached millions. Stevens. Shame trends nationwide. "I stand by my previous statement," he manages, but his voice cracks slightly. A veteran among the reporters calls out, "Sir, your commanding officer confirmed Morn's Delta 17 status this morning. Will you apologize?" Lieutenant Mark Stevens feels the weight of every camera, every eye, every judgment. His insignia catches another flash, and he resists the urge to tear it off. The sound of Tessa's forklift stopping makes him flinch. For a moment he thinks she might speak, might finally acknowledge the chaos he's brought to her quiet life. But she simply adjusts her jacket, that jacket he'd tried to take, and returns to work. "The base supports all our personnel," he recites mechanically, knowing these words ring hollow now. The hashtag #DeltaStrong has replaced his trending shame, celebrating Tessa's quiet strength rather than his loud failure. His phone buzzes in his pocket. Another message from command about the upcoming disciplinary hearing. The reporters begin to disperse, realizing he won't break, won't give them the soundbite they crave. As their vehicles pull away, Lieutenant Mark Stevens remains standing, a statue of fading authority. The victory feels hollow, tasting of defeat. Comment below if you've ever had to stand guard over someone you once wronged. Let us know how it felt to protect what you tried to destroy. Delta Strong. Behind him, Tessa's forklift hums back to life. Lieutenant Mark Stevens straightens his back, adjusting his insignia one last time. He'll stand here as long as needed, protecting her right to work in peace, the very peace he'd shattered with his ignorance. It's the least he can do, this silent vigil of atonement. "Lieutenant," her voice, speaking to him for the first time since yesterday's confrontation, makes him turn. "Your shift ended an hour ago." He meets her eyes, sees no anger there, just quiet strength. "I know," he replies, turning back to face the empty parking lot. The sun sets behind the base, casting long shadows. Lieutenant Mark Stevens stands his ground, guardian now of the very dignity he'd tried to strip away. Type guard. If you believe protection can be a form of redemption, share this story to honor those who serve quietly. Lieutenant Mark Stevens stood in the doorway of the logistics office, watching Tessa Morn methodically process shipping manifests as if he didn't exist. The insignia pin that had once represented everything to him, authority, respect, control, now felt cold and meaningless in his trembling hand. A month had passed since that fateful confrontation, but the weight of his arrogance still pressed heavily on his chest. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant reminder of the unchanging routine that continued despite how profoundly his world had shifted. His eyes fixed on the worn military jacket hanging on the back of her chair, the same one he'd tried to strip from her shoulders in a moment of misguided superiority. Now he knew its true significance, the blood-soaked story of Delta 17 woven into its fabric. "I never thought silence could be so loud," Lieutenant Mark Stevens whispered to himself, placing the insignia pin carefully on the corner of her desk. The small metal object caught the light, throwing fractured reflections across shipping manifests and requisition forms. Tessa didn't look up, her fingers continuing their steady dance across the keyboard. The sound of keys clicking filled the space where his authority used to echo. His phone buzzed. Another notification about the viral video that had captured his fall from grace. Stevens. Falls had trended for weeks, but it wasn't the public humiliation that haunted him now. It was the quiet dignity with which she'd stood her ground, carrying the weight of Delta 17's sacrifice without seeking recognition or glory. The military protocol training video played on screens across bases nationwide now, his face frozen in that moment of supreme arrogance before the truth shattered his world. "Let this be a lesson," his superior had said during his disciplinary hearing, "about the difference between power and honor." Lieutenant Mark Stevens touched the empty space on his uniform where the insignia pin had rested for 15 years. The warehouse machinery hummed in the background, a steady rhythm that hadn't changed since that day. Nothing had changed, except everything had. "Some honors are earned in silence," he murmured, the words from his final report echoing in his mind. His fingers traced the edge of the desk, remembering how he'd towered over her that day, demanding respect he hadn't earned while standing before someone who'd earned it all. The security camera in the corner blinked its red light steadily, recording another moment in the endless stream of ordinary days. But Lieutenant Mark Stevens knew better now, knew that extraordinary courage often wore the most ordinary disguises. Drop one if you understand that true heroism doesn't always wear medals. He turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the vast warehouse space. Behind him, the insignia pin caught the light one final time, transformed from a symbol of authority to one of humility and understanding. The gentle hum of machinery continued, unchanged, indifferent to the profound transformation of one man's heart. Share this video if you believe in the power of quiet dignity over empty authority. True honor.